Have you ever wondered what happens when a stranger steps out of the storm, carrying with them not just a drenched cloak, but a truth that could shatter or save a forgotten town? They say rain washes away sins, but what if the rain delivers someone who has none? Or perhaps too many to count. She stood trembling in the downpour, her hair clinging to her pale face, her lips quivering between silence and a story no one dared to ask for. And then through the curtain of water, a small freckled child lifted his face and whispered the question no adult would dare. Did you come from God's home? That single question was not innocence, it was prophecy. For the moment she arrived, the old secrets of the town began to stir, and no one who heard her answer would ever sleep peacefully again. This is not just the story of a woman shivering in the rain. It is the unraveling of a mystery buried beneath years of silence, shame, and secrets too heavy for even the strongest hearts to carry. In this tale, you will journey into a forgotten town, one where whispers echo louder than bells, and where every gaze hides a story untold. You will walk alongside her, the stranger no one expected, the figure whose arrival seemed written in some ancient book of fate. With her presence comes the stirring of memories long buried, a betrayal that once tore families apart, a curse whispered by the elders, and a question every soul has avoided, until the freckled child dared to ask it aloud. As the story unfolds, you will face moments that demand you look closer, at faith, at destiny, and at the weight of secrets carried across generations. You will witness betrayals where love should have been, kindness where cruelty once reigned, and an awakening that threatens to change every life it touches. At the center of it all stands a mysterious figure, cloaked not just in rain, but in legend. Who is she? A fugitive of the past? A messenger of something greater? Or a storm herself disguised as flesh and bone? What you are about to experience is not a tale told in straight lines, but a spiral, each revelation leading deeper, each question birthing another. There will be moments of wonder, of shattering heartbreak, and of truth so raw it cannot be ignored. And as the child's question echoes, "Did you come from God's home?" you too will hunger for the answer. The town of Ashgrove was the kind of place that never truly dried. Even when the skies cleared, the stones on the narrow streets held the memory of rain, slick and dark, as though they were unwilling to release the secrets buried in their cracks. Wooden houses leaned toward each other, their beams swollen by years of damp weather, their shutters always half closed, like eyes unwilling to meet another's gaze. The church stood tallest, though its steeple no longer rang with faith. The bell was rusted silent, and ivy climbed its sides like grasping fingers. People said Ashgrove was not cursed, only forgotten. But forgotten places often carried the heaviest curses. It was into this world she stumbled, the stranger. Her cloak clung to her as though stitched from shadows, water dripping from its hem with each step. Her face was pale, though not lifeless. There was something otherworldly about the way her features caught the dim lamplight, sharp yet soft, fragile yet unyielding. She was no ordinary traveler. She looked less like someone who had walked the long road, and more like someone who had been cast out of another world entirely. The townsfolk noticed her immediately. Windows cracked open, eyes darted between curtains. Strangers rarely passed through Ashgrove anymore. The place lay too far off any trade road, too deep in the valley for anyone to wander into by chance. So her presence was not an accident. It was an omen. And yet, while the adults watched in silence, it was a child who moved. A boy with freckled cheeks, hair sticking damp to his forehead, and eyes wide with something between fear and fascination. He stepped forward, barefoot in the puddles, ignoring his mother's sharp call from the doorway. His voice broke the silence, soft but certain. "Did you come from God's home?" She looked down at him, shivering, not just from the cold, but from something heavier, the weight of memory. Her lips parted, but no words came. For a heartbeat, the rain seemed to fall slower, as if the world itself leaned closer to hear her answer. Behind the stillness, the town itself seemed to breathe again. Restless, old men shifted on their stools, mothers clutched their children tighter, and whispers began to thread the air like threads of smoke. Ashgrove had lived with silence for too long, and silence has a way of waiting for the right voice to break it. What the townsfolk did not know, what even she herself had not yet decided, was whether her arrival was salvation or reckoning. The stranger did not answer the child immediately. Her lips trembled, as though she were searching for a language buried in her chest, one she had not spoken in years. The boy's eyes never left her, though his mother hissed his name from the doorway, demanding he return. But he didn't move. Something about the woman, about her silence, anchored him to the puddles where he stood. When at last she spoke, her voice was softer than the rain, and yet every ear caught it. "I came from where I was sent, no more, no less." The words were simple, but they rippled through the street like a bell toll no one expected to hear. The townsfolk exchanged glances, uneasy. Sent by whom? For what? The child tilted his head, freckles bright against his pale skin. "Sent from God?" he asked again, but this time his voice trembled, as though he feared her answer. The woman did not reply. Instead, she stepped forward, her boots leaving dark impressions in the wet dirt. Wherever she walked, the rain seemed to hesitate, falling around her rather than upon her, as though the storm itself feared touching her too much. Whispers rose louder now. Someone muttered that she was an outcast, another that she was a widow. An old woman crossed herself 3 times, but none dared step into the street to block her way. She stopped at the edge of the square, where a stone fountain stood dry and cracked. For years it had not flowed. Some said the spring beneath had died, others whispered it had been cursed. The woman bent and touched its rim with trembling fingers. And then something impossible happened. A trickle of water bubbled from the fountain's mouth. It was faint, almost too small to notice, but enough to silence every voice at once. The boy's mother gasped and dragged him inside, slamming the door. The rest of the townsfolk backed away, fear and awe mingling in their eyes. The stranger simply stared at the water, as though it had betrayed her by responding. The fountain's trickle thickened, a steady stream gurgling where for years only dust had gathered. The rain, relentless as it was, had never filled that basin. But now, clear water rose with quiet defiance, reflecting the lanterns flickering in the square. The townsfolk drew closer despite themselves, their feet dragging as though curiosity pulled harder than fear. Old Mr. Harrow, who had seen 60 winters, whispered hoarsely, "It was dry since the fever year. Since the graves." His words carried weight, and some muttered prayers under their breath. The woman did not look at them. Her gaze was fixed on the water, wide and haunted, as though she feared what she had awoken. The freckled boy pressed his face to his window, eyes glowing in the lamplight. He saw something no one else noticed, that the woman's hand shook violently after touching the stone. She clenched her fingers, hiding them in her cloak, but he had seen it. Something about her was breaking, even as the fountain came alive. Then a sound cracked through the silence, a crow's call, sharp and ragged. The bird sat on the church steeple, its feathers slick, its eyes watching the square with unnatural stillness. To the townsfolk it was only a crow, but to the woman it was recognition. She flinched, stepping back as though struck. "Bad omen," someone whispered. "She brings the storm inside her." The woman's gaze darted upward to the crow, then back to the fountain, which now gushed with a strength it had not known in decades. She pressed a hand to her temple, pain etched in her face, and then, without warning, she collapsed to her knees. Gasps broke the crowd. No one rushed forward. No one touched her. Only the boy, still watching from behind glass, pressed his hand against the pane, his freckles wet with tears. He didn't understand why, but he knew she was not to be feared. She was to be saved. And in the silence that followed, the crow took flight, circling above as though heralding something yet unseen. The stranger did not rise. Kneeling in the square, she looked less like a traveler and more like a penitent, someone bearing a weight too vast for human shoulders. The fountain spilled behind her, its waters alive again, and the sound of rushing echoed like a hymn through the night. The villagers dared not move closer. To touch her might mean inviting whatever power clung to her. To speak to her might mean binding oneself to her fate. And so they watched, breaths caught, as though the entire town were holding its lungs. But the boy slipped away. His mother's grip had been too tight, her fear too loud. Yet children often see what adults blind themselves to. He padded barefoot into the square, the stones cold beneath his feet, and stopped just short of the woman. She lifted her head slowly. Rain carved lines down her cheeks, but it was not rain alone. Tears mingled with it, silent and endless. The boy whispered, barely audible, "Why are you crying?" Her lips parted. She wanted to answer, but the truth was heavier than speech. She reached instead into her cloak and drew out something wrapped in cloth, small, fragile, trembling in her hands. She pressed it against her chest, guarding it from the storm, as if it were more precious than her own breath. The boy's eyes widened. "What is it?" The woman only shook her head, clutching it tighter. The crow screeched again from the steeple, its wings slicing the sky like black blades. And then, without warning, the church bell rang. The sound was deafening, impossible. For years it had been rusted, immovable, forgotten. Yet now it tolled, one heavy strike after another, rattling windows, shaking the bones of every soul in Ashgrove. The townsfolk fell to their knees in terror. The boy covered his ears. The woman gasped, eyes wide with dread, as though the sound itself was a summons. She whispered only one thing, a warning torn from her throat. The bell's toll echoed long after it stopped, as though the valley itself carried the sound into its bones. No one in Ashgrove dared speak of what they had witnessed that night, but no one slept either. Curtains were drawn, doors bolted, and yet eyes remained open in the dark, haunted by the fountain, the crow, and the stranger's trembling hands. At dawn, the square looked almost ordinary again. The fountain still flowed, its basin full for the first time in decades, and the woman was gone. Some claimed she had vanished with the storm. Others swore they saw her walk into the forest that curled around the village like a waiting mouth. But the truth was simpler. She had been taken in. Old Widow Kettle, whose house leaned crookedly at the edge of the square, had offered her shelter. Some said pity had driven her, others whispered it was madness. Yet the woman accepted without protest, vanishing behind the widow's sagging door as though she belonged nowhere else. Inside, the house smelled of herbs and old wood smoke. Widow Kettle said little, only setting a bowl of broth before her guest, watching closely as she lifted the spoon with shaking hands. "Folk will talk," the widow muttered. "They always do. But I see more in you than they see." The woman lowered her gaze. Her name had not been asked nor offered. It seemed dangerous even to herself to speak it aloud. Meanwhile, the boy, Ewan, though few used his name, could not stay away. He lingered outside the crooked house, pretending to chase stray cats or kick stones, always circling back to the door. He had seen her tears, heard her whisper. He knew she carried something important, and though he was young, he felt it in his bones. She was not meant to be left alone. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, he gathered courage and knocked. Widow Kettle answered, squinting down at him. "What do you want, boy? I just want to see her," Ewan stammered. The widow hesitated, then muttered, "Fate's fool," and let him in. Inside, the woman sat by the fire, her cloak drying on a chair, her hands still clutching the cloth bundle. She looked up, startled, as Ewan stepped closer, and for the first time she spoke without hesitation. "You shouldn't be here. It isn't safe." But what she didn't realize was that safety had already left Ashgrove the moment she arrived. Ewan did not move, though her warning pressed on him like the weight of the storm itself. His small hands clenched at his sides. "I'm not afraid," he said, voice barely above a whisper. The woman studied him, her eyes searching for something. Weakness, perhaps, or innocence untouched by the shadows she carried. Instead, she found a strange strength. Children often did not know the meaning of fear until the world taught it cruelly. Yet there was something else about this boy, a knowing, almost too old for his years. She sighed and unwrapped the cloth just enough for him to glimpse what she guarded. His breath caught. Inside lay not gold nor relic nor weapon, but a small book, its leather cover worn, its pages bound with a ribbon darkened by water and time. Strange symbols were etched into its cover, glowing faintly when the firelight struck them. "What is it?" Ewan asked, awe overtaking fear. Her fingers tightened around it. "It's not meant for this place, not meant for these people." Her voice cracked. "If they see it, they will think it is a curse." Ewan leaned closer, his freckles glowing like stars in the firelight. "But it isn't, is it?" "It's something else. Something important." The woman closed the cloth around the book again, pressing it to her chest. "Important things are the most dangerous of all." Before Ewan could speak again, the door rattled violently. Widow Kettle stiffened, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Voices called from outside, low, insistent, laced with suspicion. "Widow! Bring the stranger out. We have questions." "They'll burn her," the widow muttered under her breath, fear sharpening her words. "They always burn what they don't understand." The woman rose slowly, her face pale but resolved. She moved toward the window, peering out into the night. Torches flickered in the square, shadows of men stretching long against the walls. The fountain gushed still, louder than before, its waters reflecting fire like molten glass. Ewan grabbed her hand. "Don't go! Please!" She looked down at him, torn between the instinct to run and the certainty that running would only fan the flames of suspicion. For a heartbeat, she considered disappearing into the forest where no torch could follow. But something in the fountain's reflection caught her eye. A shimmer, a movement almost like a figure within the water itself, watching her. She froze, and in that moment, she knew. The storm she carried was no longer hers alone. It belonged to Ashgrove now. The pounding on the door grew louder. The voices outside rose like a storm tide. "She woke the fountain," one man shouted. "The bell tolled at her coming," cried another. "Witch!" someone spat, the words slithering through the night like venom. Widow Kettle barred the door with her frail arms spread wide, as though her thin frame could hold back an entire mob. "She is under my roof," the old woman hissed. "And my roof answers to no mob." The woman knew this could not last. Fear had a way of spreading faster than fire, and soon nothing would keep them from breaking through. She turned toward Ewan, who still clutched her hand. His eyes pleaded with her, pleaded not only for her safety, but for answers. Her voice was low, urgent. "Listen to me. What I carry is older than this village, older than the church bell that tolled. It was given to me, but not for me. For someone else." Her gaze locked with his. "For someone like you." Ewan's chest tightened. "Me? But I'm just a boy." "Sometimes the smallest hands are chosen to hold the heaviest burdens," she whispered. The door cracked under the force of a blow. The widow shrieked, pushing her shoulder against it. The woman pulled Ewan close, her heart pounding. She could not place why, but she knew the book was meant for him. His freckles, his question in the rain, the way he saw her when others only feared. Destiny had marked him in ways no one yet understood. "Take it," she said, thrusting the bundle into his hands. "Hide it, guard it. No matter what happens to me, you must keep it safe." His small arms tightened around the cloth, the weight of it almost too much. But he nodded. The door burst inward. Torches flared. Shadows crowded the room, faces twisted with fear, disguised as righteousness. They saw her standing there, pale and trembling, Ewan clutching the bundle, and yet before anyone could seize her, the fountain outside roared, louder than ever. The ground shuddered. Water gushed over the basin, spilling into the square, racing like veins of silver through the cobblestones. Every villager froze. Their torches sputtered. The woman's voice cut through the chaos, not loud but carrying, "This is only the beginning. It has begun." The torrent from the fountain surged through the square, spilling into alleyways, climbing doorsteps, rising ankle-deep in moments. Torches hissed and died, leaving the mob half-blind in the sudden darkness. The villagers' cries turned from accusation to fear, and in the chaos, Ewan clutched the bundle tighter, his knuckles white while the woman stood motionless in the flickering gloom. It was no longer about her. It was about what she carried, and what it had awakened. "Seize her!" someone shouted, though his voice cracked with doubt. A few lunged forward, splashing through the rising water, but before they could touch her, the church bell tolled again. 1 strike, 2, 3. Each note reverberated through bone and marrow, shaking dust from rafters, rattling the windows of every home in Ashgrove. And with each toll, the fountain surged higher, as if the bell itself commanded the waters. The woman staggered, clutching her head. She had heard this sound before, not in Ashgrove, but long ago in a place she had fled from, a place that had marked her with its shadow. Her knees buckled, and she whispered through clenched teeth, "It has followed me here." Ewan heard. The words chilled him, though he didn't yet understand them. "What followed you?" he asked, desperate. Her eyes burned with a grief too old for her face. "Not what?" she said. "Who?" The widow tried to shield them both, but the mob was breaking through the water, rage rekindled by fear. "She's cursed us! The bell tolls for her. Burn her!" The boy's voice cracked through the din. "No, she's not a witch." His cry, shrill and raw, stopped them for a moment. Children rarely spoke in such defiance, and for a heartbeat the villagers faltered. But then the crow returned, swooping low through the square, black wings cutting across the torches. It landed upon the fountain's rim, cawing so fiercely that the waters themselves seemed to quake. And in its shadow the villagers found new conviction, a sign, they believed, of evil. They surged forward again. The woman pulled Ewan to her, her hands trembling. "Listen to me," she whispered urgently. "What you hold. It must never touch their hands. If they burn it, if they bury it, the silence will grow too deep to ever be broken." Ewan's throat ached. "But why me?" "Because you asked," she said, eyes glistening. "Because when the storm came, you did not hide. You saw me and you asked." The door gave way at last. Villagers poured inside, faces twisted with desperation. The widow shrieked, raising a poker, but it was no use. The woman rose to her full height, soaked and pale, her eyes blazing. For the first time, she did not tremble. She met their hatred with something fiercer. Resolve. "You call me witch," she said, her voice carrying above the roar of water. "But I am only a messenger. The curse you fear is not mine, it is yours. You chained it in silence, buried it in stone, and now it rises. Not because of me, but because you would not remember." The mob hesitated, fear flickering behind their rage. Some drew back, murmuring, but others pressed forward, unwilling to let go of their fear's chosen target. The woman reached for Ewan's hand, gripping it tightly. "We must go," she said. "Now." The boy didn't resist. Clutching the bundle to his chest, he followed as she pushed through the throng. The waters parted around her steps as though the flood itself obeyed her will. Villagers reached to grab her, but every hand that brushed her cloak recoiled, burned by something unseen. Together, she and Ewan burst into the square. The bell struck again, louder than ever, and cracks split the church steeple. Stones tumbled, sending sparks through the night. The villagers screamed, scattering from the falling debris. The woman didn't look back. She pulled Ewan toward the forest's edge, her breath ragged. Behind them, the crow shrieked once more, rising into the storm-churned sky. They reached the first line of trees, and there, beneath the dripping boughs, the woman finally stopped. She turned to Ewan, her face lit only by moonlight, fractured through the leaves. "This is the point of no return," she said softly, her voice breaking. "If you come with me now, you will never be only a boy again. The book will mark you, as it marked me. You will carry its weight until the day it claims its answer." Ewan's chest heaved, his breath fogging in the cold night. He thought of his mother's fear, of the villagers' rage, of the bell that had not tolled for years until her coming. And he thought of the question he had asked her in the rain. "Did you come from God's home?" Her eyes brimmed with sorrow and fire. "No," she whispered. "But I was sent to lead someone there." The forest loomed before them, dark and endless. Behind, Ashgrove writhed in panic, the bell and the waters rising together in dreadful chorus. Ewan tightened his hold on the bundle, his freckles wet with tears. "Then I'll go with you." And with those words, the path ahead sealed itself. Whatever awaited, there would be no return. The forest swallowed them, the cries of Ashgrove fading behind the weave of branches and storm. The ground was soft with moss, the air thick with the scent of pine and rain. For a time, neither spoke. Only the sound of the woman's breath and the boy's hurried steps filled the dark. At last, when the bell's tolls grew faint and the village was no more than a dim glow in the distance, they stopped. The woman released his hand and turned to face him, her cloak heavy with water, her face pale but resolute. "You've chosen," she said. "Not as a question, but as a truth." Ewan hugged the bundle closer, the leather now warm as if alive. He nodded, though fear still tugged at him. "Will it hurt me?" She smiled faintly, sadness deep in her eyes. "It will change you. Pain is part of that, but it is also how light enters." Above them, the crow wheeled once, then vanished into the trees. The storm began to break, and through the shifting clouds a single star appeared, fragile but unwavering. Ewan looked up at it, then back to the woman. "What happens now?" She lowered her gaze to the bundle, then to the boy's freckled face. Her hand brushed his hair, tender as a mother's. "Now," she whispered, "we walk until the silence breaks, and when it does, you must be ready to answer." Together they turned deeper into the forest, leaving Ashgrove behind. The waters would recede, the villagers would speak of curses and omens, but the truth had already left them, carried in the arms of a boy who had once asked a question in the rain. And so the silence followed, waiting, patient as eternity.